This is Jason with Tax Guard. He's been with Tax Guard for a lifetime and a half, which we prior to this we boiled down to be about 12 years ish. And so thank you again for joining us. Thank you
again. Thank you. Pleasure's mine.
So I know a little bit about your journey, but with that being said, can you tell us, one, your journey in terms of how you came to be where you are, but most importantly, how did you say, okay, wait a second, this journey is going to lead me into dealing with crazy people, which are asset-based lenders and factors? What's that story about?
So when I was like 3, maybe 4, I decided that I wanted to be a tax attorney. And not a fireman, not an astronaut, not a ball player, but a tax attorney.
Okay.
That's obviously not true.
You waited till you were 5 or 6.
Yeah, exactly. A little later. No, I went to law school. I don't know if it's funny or not, but I thought I was going to do environmental law. And when I graduated, there wasn't a whole lot of opportunity. So I kind of fell into the tax resolution industry, which is pretty common amongst our industry. No one really intended to end up where we ended up, but it turned out we just kind of fell into it one way or another, through friends, through just answering an ad in the paper, whatever. And then over time, we got good at it. And then later on, we realized, hey, there's a significant overlap between our customers and customers that work with factors and asset-based lenders. So back in 2009, Hanson Rada and I went and visited with the International Factoring Association. And we were surprised at how open, how receptive, and just nice the people were at the International Factoring Association. Looking back, I'm a little embarrassed at the number of questions that we asked, because we pretty much asked anything and everything we could possibly ask. And the people we talked to were very, very friendly, very, very helpful. And it was that feedback that we realized there really is a way that we can all work together to identify tax issues, solve them, and most importantly, preserve the funding relationship.
And so that was in 2009. Correct. I love the fact that you said, I'm embarrassed to say that we asked a lot of questions. There's nothing wrong with asking a lot of questions, right?
We monopolized the conversation on occasion. And so if I had to go back and do it again, I probably wouldn't have done it exactly the same way. Asking the questions was important, but I probably could have been a little more tactful for sure.
I can, you know what? I'm going to leave that. I'm not going to go forward with that line of questioning on how you could be more tactful. I'd love to
appreciate that.
But okay, so when you entered the industry that way, and I'd love to go back and talk to you about environmental law, right? And so wait, when did you graduate from law school?
2000.
2000. Okay. Now, do people call you Dr. Peckham?
No.
Should they call you Dr. Peckham?
No. Okay. If you have a PhD, you should call someone with a PhD doctor, but attorneys, no.
Not so. No. So a JD doesn't get you the right to be called doctor?
No. Only if you're watching, is it Fletch or Spies Like Us with the doctor scene? Maybe, but no, I wouldn't even go there.
Okay. All right. So I'll refrain. I'll go back to calling you Coach Peckham then, if that's the case.
Fair enough.
So when you graduated in 2000, environmental law, that's kind of cool. Could you just say, you know what, forget Tax Guard. I'm done. I'm hanging up my Tax Guard days. I'm going to go now be an environmental lawyer. Would there be work for you?
Theoretically, I wouldn't do it though. And the reason why is because over the last 12 years of working with, factors, asset-based lenders, and the vast majority of those are within the IFA community, I've developed a number of relationships, partnerships, friendships, and it would be tough to leave that behind. But also, we'll probably get into this a little bit later, but last year was tough on several levels, with the economy, with PPP loans, with the Internal Revenue Service being shut down for 9 months. There's a lot going on in 2021, 2022. And that's something that we need to, continue to work with, because there's going to be a lot of businesses that owe money to the Internal Revenue Service, lenders that are going to need our help to, protect the lender, protect the business, preserve the funding relationship. There's a lot to do. So between enjoying what I do, working with a lot of really good people, not only within Tax Guard, but within the factoring community in general, and again, just having, kind of a mission or something to do, yeah, I'm not looking for my encore career just yet.
So 2009, we're going to, trust me, we're going to get to 2021 one of these days, but you learned a lot about, from the IFA, and from Bert, and of course, all the members you were able to interview. You talked to a bunch and created, if you will, a game plan and strategy, and here we go. And it works. It's successful. I asked you off camera if you had any real competitors out there, and because I certainly haven't seen them, and so you've created a little bit of a niche, right? And it's good and it's held. So where I'm going to go with that is, before 2009, how much were you aware of factoring and familiar were you with factoring before working with the IFA on this crazy tax guard idea?
Ooh, that's a good question. We saw it, when I say regularly, at that point in time, we were doing tax resolution work for businesses, for individuals, and I would call it more of a generalist idea. It was businesses in general, and then a handful of those businesses would be working with a bank, an asset-based lender, a factoring company, and then the federal tax lien would create a problem. So on occasion, we would run into an issue where we needed to secure a subordination of federal tax lien in addition to the installment agreement. But in terms of the knowledge of the International Factoring Association or our understanding of factoring, it was pretty limited. We were definitely educated. And again, that goes back to those initial conversations, and I'd mention a few people, but I probably shouldn't, because I'll forget others and I don't want to do that. But there was probably a group of about 10 individuals that just, like I said, answered every single question we had. And it was great. And so the understanding of factoring, it went from this to this really over the course of a weekend. And now it's much larger. I'm not a factor. I don't pretend to be one. But we have a lot better understanding because of those partnerships and those relationships we've generated over the years. But yeah, so, back in 2009, it was very small.
Go back to 2009 then, and when you began to chat with the IFA about kind of how factors and to some degree asset-based lenders, what the challenge was with regard to the relationship with the IRS, levies, liens. What were you surprised at how fragmented the industry was in terms of what our response was to the IRS and the challenges that the IRS provides for companies?
A little bit, I suppose, because where we came from, if the Internal Revenue Service didn't do anything, and what I mean by that is essentially levy the business out of existence, that was a good day. And that's not really the same thing for a lender. There's priority issues that need to be addressed. The lender needs to make sure that they have a security interest and priority on their collateral, on the receivables. And so it's not just about making sure the Internal Revenue Service doesn't levy today, but it's also making sure that the lender's protected, that the collateral is protected, because funding behind the Internal Revenue Service, after that 45-day time frame, if you're in second position, it exposes the lenders to tortious conversion of assets as well as levy. So there's a lot more going on than we originally kind of understood, and that's where those initial conversations were so helpful, is because not only is it the lender, but sometimes it's the lender's lender that creates those concerns. I mean, you've got to make sure that if you've got some money coming in from another lender, that their concerns are taken into consideration as well. So there was a lot that we didn't understand, but we were able to get up to speed really quickly, again, because of the help that we got from those initial people that we talked to from the IFA.
know as a factor, one of the things that I enjoyed about being able to pick up the phone and call Tax Guard was there was somebody that, one, would take my call, and then two, would be able to say, it's okay, this is what this means. Now, my experience prior to that was that you could pick up the phone and call a tax attorney, and there's lots of good tax attorneys out there, but there was not a source by which I felt like I could just talk to somebody and ask questions without having to sign a retainer and having to engage the attorney to represent me. And as it turns out now, I know for me personally and for hundreds of other finance companies, now you represent me. And I didn't have to sign an engagement letter. I didn't have to pay you a retainer. And so there's no knock on attorneys, but it made discussion about taxes and the problems that might happen way more conversational and way less, I can't give you an opinion because that hasn't happened yet, that kind of thing. Did you find people like me coming to you because they just wanted a friend in their corner when it came to tax issues?
Part of it, I think there's a few things that are involved there. I mean, we do have two aspects of what we do. So on the one hand, we monitor tax compliance for businesses that borrow money from banks, asset-based lenders, and factors. So that monitoring piece is important because it allows you to get out in front of issues before they become a problem. Now, to your point, when there is a liability out there, you can give us a phone call. Whether it's myself, whether it's Rachel, you'd mentioned Matt earlier in the phone call. We've got 5 associates who actually get in, and that's the second part of what we do, resolve issues on the back end. So we set up installment agreements. We secure subordinations of federal tax lien. Those individuals that actually do the work, they kind of do the work. And then like Rachel and myself would, you'd call us and then have that initial consultation about, what the issues are, what the risk is to the business, what the risk is to the lender. And then it's not really our job to tell you what to do, but to give you information, present you with options. And every lender has a different threshold or tolerance for risk. Some people are very conservative, some people are much more aggressive, and a lot of people are somewhere in between. Again, our job isn't to tell lenders what to do, but to let them, give them information. Here's the black letter law. Here's how the Internal Revenue Service works in practice. And at that point in time, the lender can make an informed decision. But it really becomes a partnership so that we're all working together, right? The business, the lender, Tax Guard, working out a solution that works for everybody.
And I want to come back. One of the things that maybe this is turning into a shameless plug for Tax Guard, but one of the things that I enjoyed was, in literally being, you and I haven't talked probably one-on-one on a call for probably 5-6 years.
It's been a while, which is probably not a terrible thing. It just means you haven't had the issues to deal with.
Well, either that or maybe maybe you're screening my calls again. But again, the nice thing is, maybe it's even what seemingly is a minor issue, but the ability to simply pick up the phone. And to your point, you don't necessarily tell the factor or the asset-based lender what to do, but you give them not only the factual information, this is what this means. You just made reference to it just a second ago, but what the underlying practice of the IRS may be, what for even that perspective, Jason, what the trend may be now in terms of how the IRS is looking at these kinds of issues. It may be something different now than it was in 2010 or 15 or pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, pre-recession, post-recession, and just having that feel. Yeah, of course, you'll never tell the business what to do, but at least just getting the information and the knowledge that you guys have is indispensable versus having to pick up the phone and retain an attorney. I found it really quite a relief.
Oh, I appreciate that. And I mean, that's really the design of what we put together. I mean, it's, again, listening. It's based on the relationships. It's based on customer service. It's based on the partnership. And when issues arise, we encourage the lenders to reach out and give us a phone call because every case is different. And depending on what the lender's concerns are, whether there's cross-collateralization, what's going on with the Internal Revenue Service, there can be 4 or 5 different options for resolving an issue. And I think sometimes lenders just kind of jump to one conclusion without really taking a look at all of the options. And there's situations where we tell lenders, look, this is too far gone. You just need to collect and get out. And we've done that with you on occasion or two. But really what we're trying to do, of course, is figure out a solution so that we can preserve the funding relationship. But at the end of the day, all we can do is discuss options, make an informed decision, and then bust our butt to get it done for you.
I'm sure there's legal aspects which many of us don't understand. You guys do, as to what information is available to you versus what's not. Mm-hmm. But both in terms of the monitoring side, and then of course the resolution side, the part that Matt and some of your crew execute. What's it been like working with the IRS?
On some levels, well, we always like to joke that we have a love-hate relationship with the Internal Revenue Service. They make things difficult, but then again, that's why we have a job. So when it comes to the Internal Revenue Service and trends, that's a little more difficult at this point because they were effectively shut down for about 9 months in 2020. Revenue officers worked from home remotely. A lot of the processes just didn't get done. There were truckloads of mail parked outside the Internal Revenue Service, and they say we've caught up, and we don't think that's probably accurate. It's maybe a little optimistic. There's a process in terms of just getting like a power of attorney into the system. It used to take 5-6 days, maybe business days, and now it's taking 75 for those to get entered into the system, which is just one little issue. And if you compound that across the entire Internal Revenue Service, it's a bit of a cluster. They're doing the best they can. I think they're good people. They try to do the right thing, but they don't ask us for our opinion. So they kind of shoot first and ask questions later. Sure. And the downside to that is things are taking a lot longer. Decisions are maybe what we wouldn't consider. I mean, the IRS has never acted in a logical fashion probably, but it's even worse now. Mm. And so the takeaway, I think, is, the IRS is going to catch up. There's a lot more businesses that owe money to the Internal Revenue Service today than a year ago. So between the Internal Revenue Service having problems, between a lot more of these customers that we're going to see, not only ours, but obviously lenders as well that have issues with the Internal Revenue Service, it just becomes more and more important to identify those issues early and then be proactive to resolve them. Because if we think, we're going to have a 45-day window, lien gets filed, we got 45 days to secure an installment agreement. First, you're not going to have 45 days. By the time you figure out the lien is filed, 2, 3, 4 weeks have already gone by. You have a 2-week window to secure that solution. But the Internal Revenue Service isn't moving very quickly. So we really need to get involved before the federal tax lien is filed. And again, that goes back to the monitoring piece, identifying it so we can get out in front of it.
Yeah, I would imagine just thinking about what the IRS endured during the pandemic, and then thinking about what they're continuing to endure. Mm-hmm. We're going to see, you're going to see your business increase substantively here in the short term. I think where many of my kind of clients are going to wake up and say, "Oh gosh, I either one did something wrong, or two, things were so crazy I didn't file properly in quarters 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever it may be." And I think we're going to see a lot of companies utilizing and needing your service. You think I'm crazy, or do you think that's probably the future?
No, I think that's pretty accurate. I always get the quote wrong, but there's something about the idea of all boats floating in the rising tide, something to that effect. And I think that's true for Tax Guard, but I think it's for lenders in general. Yeah. 2020 was a tough year in large part because you had the issues with the economy, PPP loans, then who's going to borrow money from anybody else when you can get cheap money from the government? So yeah, that hurt, right? We all got kicked in the shins last year. But as lenders then are be able to book more clients, it sounds like that's the trend across the board, or at least the expectation. there's certain industries and segments that have been hurting for a while that are, knock on wood, they're going to come back in the next 6, 9, 12 months. So I think there's a lot of reason for optimism, not only in the factoring community and the asset-based lending community, but as you guys book more deals, like I said, you are going to see a few more issues with the Internal Revenue Service because of what happened. And yeah, I think we'll be busy as a result.
What's your feeling about this industry? And when you deal with a factor, what's the takeaway in terms of the style as it relates to a factoring company versus that of an asset-based lending company? And I love putting you on the spot like this.
Fair enough. I'm going to try to toe the line here because we have clients in both.
That doesn't mean one's good or bad. They're just different.
No, not at all. There absolutely are some differences. And there's a lot of crossover too, right?
Yeah,
in the sense of there's a lot of factors that, they do both. The thing that struck me initially, and I keep kind of going back to it, is how friendly and down to earth the people in the factoring community are, and how willing they are to have conversations and really just answer questions and educate and be partners and work together. That's something that I don't see in other industries. And there's a lot of personalities in the factoring community, which is nice. And like I said, there's a lot of friends that we've developed over time. So that's really, I think, the takeaway from the factoring community is there are those partnerships, the friendships that you don't just get. You can't take it for granted because they don't exist in other industries, for sure.
One of the things that I think about in terms of differences between factors and asset-based lending, and having sat in both chairs, I've often wondered to myself, are factors as a breed, when it comes to issues with the IRS, more aggressive or less aggressive? And some would say, well, certainly they're not less aggressive, but I might argue this, right? So, an asset-based lender, in theory, and only in theory and conceptually, is a larger entity with more net funds employed, more sophistication, has maybe a little higher tolerance for loss. And so maybe their perspective would be, your first loss is your best loss. Let's just nip it in the bud and go. Mm-hmm. And some might say, well, that's kind of a factor, right? We're aggressive. And yet maybe some of those factors are less capitalized, less well capitalized, that we don't want to see losses happen. We'll do anything in the world to try to avoid a loss, as crazy as it is. So I've often teetered back and forth as to which of the two industries would be more aggressive when it comes to dealing with IRS issues. Which would you say is more aggressive in terms of a response? So
I'm going to not answer that question. I'm going to answer it a little differently than the way you phrased it. I don't think it's something that you can go, okay, asset-based lenders do this, factors do that. You can't paint with that broad of a brush. What I think over time, last 10, 15, 20 years of observation, is that it comes down to more relationships. So if it doesn't really matter whether it's a factor or an asset-based lender, if they have a good relationship, if there's history, if there's trust, if there's cross-collateralization, if there's a way to make sure they can do the deal, and there's a little more creativity involved, or they will take the time to figure out if they can be a little bit more creative, if they have that relationship. If there's no relationship, if it's just simply a transaction, then it's, okay, we're not going to mess with this because it's just not worth our time from a cost-benefit perspective. And so really, I think the bigger issue or the bigger criteria would be, is there that relationship? Does the lender want to have that relationship, as opposed to whether it's asset-based lending or factoring? Because if that relationship exists, they'll be more creative.
That's just simply a great answer, right? Because, I was speaking to somebody yesterday, another Spotlight interview, and And this gentleman said, technology is of course, has its footprint on our industry and fintech and et cetera. But he said, I'm old school. And what we were talking about is relationships. And boy, Jason, to me, you just pegged it, right? If there's a relationship there, then to the extent of that relationship will dictate the manner by which you move forward with regard to IRS issues or not IRS issues. Mm-hmm. I'm gonna share something with our audience, whomever he or she may be. So in 2000, and I believe it was 2000 and I think it was 2012. And you may not remember this, I do, and I know I've spoken to you off camera about it before. I had a client at Far West Capital that was troublesome, and unfortunately, I didn't establish a good relationship. I should have done a better job at establishing a relationship, but we were surprised at some tax liability that cropped up, and either we didn't do a good job of due diligence, or somehow or other, what was known to become known wasn't known at the time. And for a period of about 4 days, you held my hand, you patted me on the back, and you hugged me, and you said it's going to be okay. Now, I don't know for sure if you believe that or not, but you did. You said it's going to be okay. And we talked almost every night for 4 nights about strategy and what to do. And one of the things that I was amazed at was, one, was your care for a client, but then two, how you and I spoke as to the effect of Far West's actions, our actions, on the client, and your desire to think about all the participants in this equation. So not only the IRS, not only Far West, not only the situation as it relates to the loan and the balances, but you came back and you talked about what you thought might be in the best interest of the client and approaching the client that way. When, if I'm just being honest, it was an adversarial relationship at that time. And you really drove me back to asking the client again how we might be able to solve the problem. And it was instrumental, obviously, in the outcome, was your suggestion. So that's one example I know personally, obviously, of a success story where you were intimately involved in the outcome. That's an easy one. What's a success story that had a surprise ending or outcome, or something that you really, that sticks in your memory as, boy, that felt good?
Okay. The nice thing is that we have quite a few. So it's kind of hard to pinpoint one. There's the situation, it's a big staffing company on the East Coast that you're referring to, right? The one that you were talking about? Yeah, okay, I remember that one. Yeah, that was interesting. Most don't end up that way, which is good. But it's nice to know that, we can be helpful when they do go sideways, for sure. The success story that we kind of highlighted in the panel discussion for the IFA, it's a staffing company that owed $3.5 million to the Internal Revenue Service. They have like $1 million a month of revenue, $995,000 a month of expenses, give or take. We put them on an installment agreement for $5,000 per month. Most people look at that and go, there's no way you can do $5,000 a month on a $3.5 million liability. And that's one of those misconceptions that people have about the Internal Revenue Service, that the IRS would never go for that type of a deal. The liability is just too big. There's no way we can, fund that in the first place. And the nice thing is that working with lenders over time, we can identify those misconceptions, we can dispel those myths, and we can actually secure an installment agreement that the business can live with. And because the statute of limitations is 10 years, 120 months, they're on track to pay back $600,000 of a $3.5 million liability. And when the statute of limitations expires, the IRS can't collect the debt. Our client can stop making the payment. It's not a settlement. It's just an installment agreement. But because there's an end date on those payments, and we know the IRS can't collect after that, I mean, it has that effect of a settlement. But the nice thing is that the business is protected, the lender's protected, and we're able to preserve the funding relationship, because once we have the installment agreement in place, we can turn that into a subordination of federal tax lien. And then at that point, everybody wins. And that's, again, going back to the partnership relationship idea. That's what we're here for.
So, you know, I could take all day long and talk to you, right? Because you're fascinating, and there's a lot we can get into, and we could talk about a lot. What if when you meet a new factor and they're coming into the industry, mm-hmm. and you've been watching factors and asset-based lenders now for decades plus, what's one bit of advice would you tell a new factor approaching the idea of starting a factoring company?
I think leaning on the advice and the experience of others. There are best practices that if you follow those best practices, and the IFA has some really good training. I know you're doing some. And again, you know, just go on the IFA's website. There's individuals who have been doing these training sessions for years. And one in particular I'm thinking of is the best practices one. And if you follow the guidelines that best practices sets forth, yeah, I suppose there's a chance you could lose some money, but you're probably not going to. I mean, it would take quite a bit to lose money at that point. So don't learn lessons the hard way. Rely upon the experience of others, and yeah, I think that's what I would do, is learn from everyone else's experiences on hard knocks. That way you don't have to necessarily learn it on your own. I mean, you're going to, everyone does. Everyone has that story about how they lost some money.
Sure.
But you definitely want to learn more of those with somebody else's stories than with your own.
Thank you for allowing us to kind of creep into your world a little bit and see things through your eyes. I've got one very important question to wrap up this interview. And you've been posed this question before in your life, I'm sure. You're stranded on an island, and you can only have one meal a day for the rest of your life, but it must be the same meal every day. What is that meal?
Normally I would go with biscuits and gravy, but I'm not entirely sure that's going to set real well on an island. And you know, after a while you're going to get tired of it. So it would probably need to be something, I don't know, more substantial, more sustainable, or long term. I don't know, maybe oatmeal. I don't know.
Oatmeal. Okay, you're going to choose oatmeal.
We're talking long term, right? It's not necessarily what I would. I could stomach oatmeal every day. I'm not sure I could eat biscuits and gravy every day.
So I have such respect for what you do, the career that you developed, you being a thought leader in our industry. I have no respect for your choice of meal. We're going to need to work on that, clearly.
Yeah, I do. I need to think about that a little more.
Well, Coach Jason Peckham, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. Can't wait to see your panel and what you present at the IFA. There's no secret as to what you're presenting. And we're lucky as an industry to have you and Tax Guard. And thank you for doing what you did back in 2009 and creating what you created, because it's an instrumental part of what we all do.
I appreciate that. Appreciate you having me. Appreciate the IFA. It's always a great event. Like I said, the people are great. Oh, and one little shameless plug. Thursday night is our dessert reception, so make sure and join us for that.
It's always a blast to go to your dessert reception, particularly with regard to what it is that you serve. And so I can't wait to see what happens this time around.
Chocolate chip cookies and beer. It's the best.
There you go. You get, there's your meal. There it is. That's your meal.
That's right.
That's only chocolate chip cookies and beer. Okay. Mm-hmm. All right, man. I appreciate the time.
A little more going on than that, but sure. That's a good place to start.
I appreciate your time. We'll talk to you next week.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Year wasn't, if I'd have just stayed in factoring and that's it, I probably wouldn't have had a good year. But we, came up with a couple new products, did some different things, launched, to guys like my competitors and said, hey, if you're having a hard time with this, here's how we can help. And and it's made all the difference. So
Yeah.
I think that's the idea, is that if it's hard to do it, but if there's truly could be a little bit of ROI out of coming to that session, and it's later on a Friday, so a lot of people are already have other things they're thinking of doing anyway. So hopefully we'll give a little bit of benefit back by just through some practical things that we think we can elicit from guys like you and anybody in the room, and kind of then distribute in a way that people will grab something to take with them.